Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello and welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast on real estate. This is your host Abhishek Law, and we have with us Anshul Singhal, the Managing Director of Welspun One. Welspun One is an integrated fund and development management platform pioneering India's first warehousing-focused alternative investment fund. With a 4x growth in the last 5 years, the company has over 16 million square feet of Grade A industrial and logistics parks. Its flagship Bhiwandi Park houses India's largest delivery sorting center. Anshul leads Welspun One, and today he's with us on the podcast. Hello, Anshul, and welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast.
Hi, Abhishek. Pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
So, a quick question, obviously, is what is the overall outlook for India's warehousing market right now? Where do we stand? What sort of numbers are you expecting there?
So let me give you an overall market, because warehousing is part of the real estate sector in India. Let me give you an overall real estate piece and then bring it down to warehousing, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The Indian real estate sector, as you've seen, it's evolving rapidly, specifically post-COVID. And the residential office markets have stabilized. You've seen people getting back to offices. Industrial and warehousing demand has actually been growing year on year at roughly between a CAGR of 15 to 19% per annum, right? Now, that CAGR also is a little underreported because as a country, we still don't have excellent data gathering sources of tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4 cities in warehousing. So really the numbers on the CAGR you see are more tier 1 and some tier 2 cities. But if you go down to the level of tier 3, tier 4, our personal estimate is the growth of demand CAGR in warehousing is upwards of 25%, right? Which is very, very high for any country in the world. Now, having said that, the real estate sector overall contributes about 7% to India's GDP in 2024, which is projected to reach roughly about 13.5% by 2025. That's almost a double growth, since last year. And by a little longer term outlook, like by 2040, 2050 is projected to be close to 18%. But, in line with, if you see India's GDP target of 26 trillion, market today of real estate is at about $300 billion, which by 2030, from 300 billion, it's going to be at 1 trillion. That is little over a 3x growth in just a few years, right? These are pretty stark numbers. So if you just imagine all these people, like if you're in your studio right now, or if you're in your office right now, if you look around you, whoever is listening to this, every item that you see has passed through a warehouse at some point, right? And we actually coined a term saying everybody needs a warehouse. So you can just imagine the demand with all these, numbers that I gave you, these big numbers, from 300 billion going to a trillion, and from a current 7% to just 14% approximately by next year. You can imagine how many more warehouses the country will need, right? That's my view on warehousing. We are obviously, as Welspun One, expanding aggressively in south of India and west of India, with projects in Devnahalli, Bangalore, Hoskote, catering to e-commerce, FMCG and manufacturing. And we don't see a slowdown. As a portfolio, we have currently about 16 million square feet, 16 to 18 million square feet, and we have zero vacancy. So there is not a single location of ours where the warehouse is built and it's not leased.
You put out an interesting word. Everyone needs a warehouse. Something we used to say for some FMCG companies that every second product is from that company. So if I put it in that context, what exactly is driving warehousing growth now? E-commerce and quick commerce, or is it beyond that?
So see, that's a really good question. Basically, warehousing is something which is driven by consumer behavior. If you backtrack time to 2012, 2013, when e-commerce was at its, people were comfortable paying online, and credit cards online had become safe to use. Deliveries were happening in 5 to 7 days at that point, and people thought it was amazing. And then e-commerce companies started making claims of next day delivery, right? Which and everybody said that India mein to kabhi nahi hoega, next day delivery. It's never going to happen, right? And it started happening, and then consumers got used to that, and then there was this whole debacle between retail versus online. Online e-commerce will start eating share of retail businesses, which obviously didn't happen. Because even though in around 2015, 2016, online business place was growing at multifold, it was only 5%, less than 5% of India's retail penetration, even that time, right? That's how deep India's retail penetration. It's not visibly deep, probably, but it is very, very deep. Today, of course, you're seeing deliveries happening in 10 minutes, right? And we are literally the only country in the world which has absolutely mastered quick commerce. So the conversation has now moved into an omni-channel universe, from physical deliveries to kirana stores to shopping malls to now having stuff delivered to you in 10 minutes has changed the game. So what that does, it changes consumer behavior and consumer expectations. The minute you've changed a consumer behavior that I want stuff in 10 minutes and actually I can get it, that starts to then drive demand of type of properties, type of assets, type of locations. And, don't get me wrong, e-commerce still continues to grow at an alarming pace in our country. There was some oversupply situation over the last 2-3 years where lots of companies got extra warehousing space and there was a bit of slowdown post-COVID, but that's now back on track. And we've just signed a little over 1.5 million square feet of space in the last 2 months, which is pretty large for even a company like ours, and in multiple geographies. But the point I'm trying to make is demand is coming from consumer behavior, from India's growth, from purchase power parity of India still being one of the topmost in the world, and of course per capita income rising, more people getting comfortable, the behavior of ordering online. COVID kind of supercharged that behavior, right? Like everything went online once we were in COVID. And the test of time was stood where warehousing was declared, or logistics was declared as a essential sector during COVID, and it started to take off from there. So really, demand is coming from people like you and me, if to say the least. But it's also coming from industries. It's also coming from large companies, B2B, B2C, all of that. I mean, I'm just trying to give you a very simple answer, which is easy for a common person to understand.
I understand. I mean, I know there are technicalities, but since I'm also, I would love to get it on the common man's view of things in these cases.
Absolutely, yes.
So when you see this sort of growth numbers coming in and these sort of, as you said, phenomenal addition of 1.5 million square feet spaces, which are quite large, if I may just put it in context, we really had a budget going through. What were your takeaways from the budget? Is there something specific to warehouses, some InvITs, some REITs, or some sort of investment opportunities that you see there, or some sort of, facilities that the budget gave you? Can you
absolutely.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think the budget this year was quite balanced, and I actually really liked the budget this year in all respects, including the general reforms that the government is trying to push. But effectively, the digital integration and investment friendly reforms that the government has put forward towards AIFs, private investment vehicles, etc., was very, very useful. Also, warehousing is a prime candidate for a REIT or an InvIT. Just like you have 3 to 4 successful REITs in the country. Warehousing REITs are very common globally. Specifically in the US, you have multiple warehousing REITs listed. In India, there is still a debate if warehousing will come under a REIT category or an InvIT category. We don't have clarity on that from regulators, but essentially it's the same thing. It's going to be rent yielding vehicle. And that those norms of REITs and InvITs are getting far more streamlined with the government's intervention of ease of doing business. That solves somewhat the capital problem significantly in warehousing. Having said that, warehousing does not really have a capital problem, right? Warehousing has a problem of limited supply of land. And part of limited supply of land's problem is because of limited infrastructure in the country, which does not give us access to remote locations. So the government has announced that they will be spending 1.5 lakh crore on infrastructure and 1 lakh crore on Urban Challenge Fund, supporting industrial expansion, economic hubs. These two announcements bring music to my ears, because companies like ours, companies like infrastructure businesses, and companies who are my colleagues in the sector, I don't like using the words competitor, will be able to then, bring in far more investments into the country. So those are some of the initiatives that the government has taken. The government initiatives to decongest cities, optimize supply chain, enhance trade competitiveness, supporting structured logistics clusters, Simplified land acquisition. Now, land acquisition has been one of the biggest challenges in warehousing, and it's a complex subject in India. It's an emotional topic in India, right? Everybody's land is very emotional to them. So, really, the way government is trying to fairly balance that, at the same time, bring in tax clarity for AIFs, green warehousing initiatives. So there was quite a lot of stuff if you start deciphering it in this budget, which actually really aids warehousing.
If I just take one part of the response from this last question and rephrase the question and ask, infra investments have remained flattish this time around at almost at 11 lakh crore. Or so, is that some concern for you as a warehousing player?
Not really, because see, warehousing is a very interesting part of the country, right? It's partial infrastructure, but partial real estate. So it's a space that's in between infra and real estate. So the RBI qualifies it under infrastructure, right? So the Reserve Bank of India calls warehousing as infrastructure, whereas the banks and us, we consider it as part of real estate. But it's an in-between sector. Like, for example, what's our business? We build warehouses, put it on rent, right? And then we get a rental yield, and we enjoy the returns between a development return and a fully de-risked warehouse. But at the same time, it's also, we are buying hundreds of acres of land in outskirts of cities, which is similar to what an infra company would do, laying the roads, infras, etc., etc. So, we are like that in-between player. So when real estate is picking up so highly today in the country, so for example, we're building a project now in the middle of the city in Thane, right? We're building a 3.5 acre project called the World Trade Center Thane. Now, that is India's first logistics anchored mixed use development, right? So, if the infra opportunity for some reason tomorrow is less, we come into the city and we start providing services to quick commerce players. At the same time, when it rebalances, we go outside the city and start buying these large parcels of land. Also, please remember that infra catches up very slowly and always follows the demand. It takes 3-4 years just to catch up, because that's the time required to build infrastructure. And even though this year may seem flattish, that is just like a blip in a 3 to 5 year story in India. So that doesn't bother us at all.
Right. I know you referred to the point that capital isn't a problem when it comes to warehousing in India, which actually is something that I was willing to ask. What is the general investment scenario? How easy is it to invest in warehousing or raise funds for warehousing projects in India compared to a real estate or any other project in India? Since you also are a fund, you already have an AIF. So that is one part of the question. The second part, I'll come based on this answer.
See, we raised, we raised significant amount of funds. So we raised about 2,700 crores total over the last 3.5 years in warehousing, equity money in the AIF format, right? This is not debt. That's a pretty large chunk for a single company to raise. And our next fund that we are going to be raising is roughly about 4,000 crores. Over and above this, just in 2024, $2.5 billion was invested in warehousing in India, right? I'm just talking about 1 year. If I start giving you the 5-year numbers, they're very, very high. And I'll tell you why. Because warehousing is an asset class that is highly, most of your first mile warehouses are in areas which are still to see urbanization. They are still to see city developments. So effectively, when I go and buy a 50 to 100 acre parcel of land in an outskirt of a city like Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Pune, I'm probably buying it at X. But the rate at which that land will appreciate over time, once I start putting a warehouse on it, over the next 10-15 years, that land may become inside the city because the city is growing in that direction, right? So investors actually love warehousing across the globe. And in a country like India, where GDP is still at approximately 7%, there is no question about growth. It's just the temporary ups and downs and blips that a market faces. But if you look at a 5-year India story, it's so solid that investors domestically and internationally love warehousing. Right. By the way, the last 5-year number is north of $10 billion US in warehousing.
This is for a period of?
Approximately 3 to 5 years.
That's the investment that is drawn, the sector has drawn.
Already gone in, yes.
Okay, which brings me to the next part of my question and a little unpopular one. You're looking to double your portfolio size and you have gone on record with that.
Yes.
So, and you just said 4,000 crore, you answered part of it. So, how is this raise going to happen? Is this a one shot fund, or you're going to break it down, or you're going to close it over the years? By when can this happen? Can you just run the listeners on their interest?
Absolutely. No problem at all. So, the 4,000 crore we are planning to raise is going to be a mix of international and domestic funds. And it's going to be, we are going to start the raise somewhere towards the middle of next financial year. So I'm talking somewhere about September, October, we're going to be commencing the raise. And we've just started filing our necessary paperwork for that. All is going positive. We have a lot of interest from existing investors who are extremely thrilled with the returns. We have returned in Fund One, we've given about 19% returns back to our investors with money back in their accounts in 2 years ahead of promised. So, for example, if I promised you that I'll return money to you in 2026, I've actually given you 18 to 19% return and delivered money back to you in 2024, right? And investors are thrilled with that outcome. Our 2,000 crore that we raised completely domestically. We also have a couple of domestic institutions who have invested in there. And, we are fairly confident that in the 4,000 crore fund, both international institutions, domestic HNIs, and domestic institutions, all three will come in a hybrid format, and we will it'll be in an AIF format, and we will be launching Fund 3 in that format.
Okay. I would love to ask one more question on the fund if you're open to it.
Yeah, depends on the question.
Which is obviously, it's a huge amount, 4,000 crore. And is there a breakup that you want to look between the international funds, HNIs, domestic high net worth individuals, NRIs? Is there a breakup you're looking at 10, 20, 50 like that?
Yeah, I mean, somewhere between 50-50. So we're thinking of doing about 2,000 crores from within India, and that 2,000 crores will be a mix of high value family offices and domestic institutions. And the second 2,000 crores, we would look at it internationally. Because then the size, under 2,000 crores doesn't make sense for an international investor to come in. So the size starts to make, it's a chunky size for an international investor to come in. And 2,000 crores is something we've already raised in India domestically. So we are confident of meeting that number again with even more speed.
And of the previous 2,700 odd crores, how much was international?
No, that was all domestic.
All domestic. So all your previous has been only domestic, right?
All domestic. We've been focusing highly on domestic.
Okay, cool. So the 2,700 is in two funds, right? If I recall right?
Yes.
Right. That was my last question. It was lovely talking to you once again and try to understand this interesting segment of warehousing. Thank you for being on the podcast. So thanks. Okay.